Hi, hello. In conversation with Dr. Julia Feast OBE. Today, I am delighted to have a conversation with Dr. Julia Feast, with a background as a social worker, researcher, and expert in policy and practice development. Dr. Feast is recognized as a key knowledge source advocating for improved access to records for care experience people and adopted people. Thank you. And I am Augusta Itua, a children's rights lawyer and legal consultant at Bath. So my first question, Julia, throughout your career, what has consistently motivated you and driven you to advocate for access to care records for adopted and care experienced people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've been around for a very, very long time. So I've had decades of working with children and families. But my interest has always been with children in care or children in need or preventative work, and less so with adopted, but it's mostly preventing children from being adopted at the beginning. But it's always been a passion of mine. And from a very early stage, I realised that lots of people in care and adopted people weren't getting the information they needed to make sense of themselves. So it became very early on for me. But I suppose the biggest thing that really changed me was when I was working at another organisation and I was seeing adopted adults. And she lived in a family, adopted parents who loved her very much. She felt very loved. And they were very short in height. They had brown hair and brown eyes. And she was completely opposite, very tall, blue-eyed, fair-skinned. And she had a passion for dogs. And her parents didn't like animals. But when we went through her records and read through and heard about her own birth mother, she couldn't believe it because there were so many similarities. And when we finished, she just said to me, I feel as I've been living in a darkened room and someone switched the light on. And that was really powerful for me. But because we're brought up in families who we know and we get information from, when you're not brought up with a family that you were born into, it can be very, very different and there can be huge gaps.
Thank you, Julia. I also believe this is a very important topic. Having reflected on my own experience and also on the experience of young people, children, young adults, and practitioners that I engage with, it has become clear to me that this is an often overlooked area. And this is really what motivated me to apply for the Churchill Fellowship, to give me the funds that I need to look into this in more depth and to dedicate some more time looking at this. Since joining Bath and also having the opportunity to meet some experts, leading experts in this area, I've been fortunate to learn more about it, but also I have had access to our advice line service, which has enabled me to really see how in practical terms, how many barriers there are, both in terms of disclosing this information, but also in terms of accessing this information. And now I really just find myself in a prime position to be able to utilize the Churchill Fellowship Network, but also the contacts that I've made in this past month, but also through Quorum and Quorum positioning to look into this area a little bit more and see how I could be helpful when it comes to the work that is already happening, the very, very valuable work. So moving on to the next question, can you explain what are the main issues, what are the challenges that adopted and care experienced people face when trying to access their records?
I suppose one of the biggest challenges is the first thing has been having information to know that records may exist. Not always exist, they've been destroyed for some reason, but there should be records somewhere about the person's time in care, and definitely if someone's been adopted, although these can be destroyed accidentally too. So it's having that information available easily that should really be told through the carers, the adopted parents, but if not, it should be easily found. But it's also having the support and services. And over the years, they're diminishing. And you can really see it because people don't understand always that it's not just about placing children for care for their childhood. It is a lifelong issue. And that things reverberate across the lifespan. and issues will come up that need to be addressed. So it's important they have support, they have information, and there's advice around, and that they have got the services that they really need for it to be addressed. And of course, the other big thing is legislation. That legislation needs to be fit for purpose. And I know we may talk about that, but there are differences between people who have been adopted and people who really care about what sort of information they can get and how they get it, and the legislative framework that's used.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a legal perspective, it does appear that there seems to be a two-tier system in both the access and the support that is available for both care experienced people and for adopted people, with better legal protect rights for adopted people in comparison to care experienced people.
Well, that's in ways it's quite complex, the whole area, because people who've been in care have to access information via the data protection routes, whereas adopted people can access information via the 1983 Adoption Agency regulations. And with DPA, there's a lot of concern about third-party information about maybe their parents, their siblings, and other people in their lives. Because in DPA, people always say they can't give out information about third party, which can be very, very restrictive. It means that many people who've been in care will end up with information that's been given out from the agency that's blanked out throughout because they're afraid or think is this third party and they can't have it. Whereas in adoption, the adoption agencies can use their discretion about what information they can give to the adopted person, which can be identifying or non-identifying. But that doesn't mean to say that someone has an ultimate right either. It's quite complicated. But the important thing is that we need legislation that's fit for both purposes of both groups, adopted people and care. And care legislation needs to be sought as a matter of urgency, really. It's been campaigning about this for years and years. And it would be lovely if it happens one of these days.
You know, whilst all of this work is happening, there are already things that can be put in place in terms of when I listened to Sarah Weekend's recording, she was mentioning how some archivists are starting to, instead of blackouts, like grayouts, and I don't like, I mean, that's more for archivists, but I'm just thinking about social workers. What in their day-to-day practice can they be thinking about, which then will have almost a lasting impact the moment it gets recorded?
I suppose it's about when what you need to work with people in care and being adopted is, although we've got to start out sometime, what's really crucial is that you have resources to help you develop that learning you're going to gain, and to use it in a way that you can make sure it's put back into practice and policy to make sure we're always getting it right for people as needs will change. So, I mean, social workers need training, they need support. In adoption, for example, there's lots of training on accessing information, disclosing information, records. In pre and post commencement, there are two separate things that you can do. And also care records too. I mean, I've done some training around that, about what information could you give. And I suppose this practice guide gives you a sort of an insight into what information can be disclosed, even when it's third-party information, because social workers and access to care records get concerned about this third-party information. But people must remember that often names of people's brothers and sisters, etc., will be registered. They'll be under the births, marriages, and deaths. They can find information publicly through records. So that is not confidential because it can be found, but it is a complex area. So social workers who deal with this and work to deal with this work need to have the support and guidance about developing the skills and information and confidence they're going to need, to not be afraid to help people understand their lives and who they are and where they come from.
Yeah, absolutely, because at the moment it does seem that there is almost adversity towards disclosing information. So reflective queries that we get very often is, can I disclose this information? There is third-party information here, and quite often you can see that the natural instinct is to not disclose the information for fear of breaching any of the regulations and any of the laws. So my understanding of this guide is that it is an enabling tool that social workers can use to access, to guide them, to provide access to information. So everything you've just said is absolutely spot on in terms of that enabling approach. Yeah.
And that's what's needed.
Yeah.
People mustn't be afraid to disclose information, but they mustn't do it in isolation either. You do need to understand the law, but you also need to have agreement that that is appropriate to give that information. But there should be very good reasons why you don't. And there have been judgments along those lines, particularly adoption. You know, why shouldn't you give this piece of information? Who is it going to harm? So they've got to be encouraged to ask certain questions, but at the same time, you have to respect other people's privacy too. So it's a really fine balance. But if you were brought up in a family who you were born into, you may well have access to that history of your lives. Imagine not getting that. If that information can help them in that area, how crucial is that?
That leads me to the next question. How are you addressing these issues? I know you do a lot of work across research, policy, and practice development. I would love if you could talk us through.
Unfortunately, it's not going to be enough time doing this little podcast today, so I have to be very quick and brief. So there's a lot more I could say. But for example, with care, we have the Access to Care Records campaign group, and that's been going for some years now. And we have been campaigning for years about changing legislation, but also good policies and practices that exist in local authority, along with CLA and other partners too, like Grenada's. And that's still going. We have a website, and we are not giving up. We're still going. We have Baroness Lola Young who supports us, which is fantastic. So we have that. But we also have, more recently, we've got the local chief, hard to say it again, sorry, the Chief Archives and of Local Government, which is a group of archivists, but with a subgroup of that, and they've been able to get funding, and we call ourselves the Archives and Records Group. They've been able to get funding so that they can look into and find out where records are held. It's partly been started because there was concern the adoption records could be destroyed in 1926, 100 years after they were allowed to do it. But so this was going a while, the last year, and we have other members. There's a lot of work that's built on the Mirror, UCL Mirror project, which has done an enormous amount of research into people in care about their information needs and how we need to improve those. And it also has the Access to Care Records campaign group. They've got CLA. So,
and just to specify, CLA, the Care Leavers Association.
That's right. So together, we try to do something. But with the Archives group, our little group, they've received funding, and they've got consultants, Kevin Bolton and associates, and they are doing a piece of work at the moment where they're contacting every local authority, an organisation in England and Wales, to find out where adoption records, but also where care records are held too, and what sort of records, in what format, because it's not just about where records are held, it's about retention schedules, what systems are in place to support that. So it's a big project, and it will finish hopefully in November 23. So there's an enormous amount of work in a very short space of time. But I hope it won't finish there. There's so much more to do.
Yeah, we've been very lucky to also have a learning for research session with Sarah Wickham, who has been doing a lot of work alongside yourself on this, and I would invite everyone to go and listen to it because it's brilliant.
So the other thing that's going to be an outcome from the Archives group is that they're going to produce guidelines about retention policies and helpful guidance to archivists and other people that work in such organisations where records are held. So that's going to be another resource. But we do need more funding in most areas, but that's what I always say.
Yeah, thank you so much. And building on that, I'd like to also offer some insight into the Church Fellowship. I have plans to visit Australia and maybe the Republic of Ireland and Scotland just because I've identified those countries as examples where there is a lot of thinking and a lot of policy and practice reform around this area. So I will be very keen to share my learning upon my return. I plan to travel in February. And also to see how that can contribute to any work that is already happening in the UK, specifically in England and Wales. So my final question for you, Julia, what's on the horizon? What's next?
Well, there are lots of possibilities. It's always, I suppose, guided by how much funding you get. But with the adoption side, because although we've had new legislation adoption through now what's called pre-commencement, post-commencement, there's lots to be sorted out for both of them. The regulations need to be tweaked. And in February this year, along with under the auspices of University East Anglia and with the RAAs, we have the
Regional Adoption Agency.
Regional Adoption Agencies. We've started a new project called Improving Adoption Services for Adults. And our remit is really to look at what's working, what isn't working, but also to produce a new practice guides for social workers who work in adoption and managers too, and to find out how things could be improved as well. So it's an ongoing project, but we should be finishing next year sometime. So hopefully we'll have a website soon, and information will be provided on that. But also with the care stuff, we've already, as you probably know, in Quorum Bath, they've published the Access to Care Records Guide for people, for professionals who work with people in care, to give them some information about what records can be shared, to think a bit outside the box a bit to make sure
we actually have a copy of it today here.
So so it has templates, all sorts of things, and that was published in 2022, it's only last year, so that's a good thing. The Access to Care Record campaign will still go on, mirrors are still working, and we have the Family Connect website, which has been excellent, and it provides information for both people who've been the care experience, but also adopted people about their rights, where they can get information from. But it's only a starter, we can build on that. And it's, for example, if we are able to get more funding for the archives group, where we find out where these records are held. We know we have the Adoption Search Union website that's held by Quorum Bath, which means you can find out where records might be held for adoption. But we don't have that for people who've been in care.
Yeah.
And ideally, we'd like to follow Australia and have something similar here, if we can.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And as you mentioned, Australia, like I said earlier, I shall keep yourself and anyone else who's interested updated about my discoveries. I plan to meet with some of the archivists who were involved in setting up the systems that are now in place with the Find and Connect service in Australia. Thank you so much, Julia, for making the time to be here with us today, and also for just making the space to talk about this very, very important issue that affects the life of many care experienced people and adopted people as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.